Hello there, it's Austin, and today we'll be making a non-alcoholic Pilsner. So let's get started. This batch starts with a yeast starter, which isn't super necessary, but since I'm reusing some Pilsner yeast, I use the Brewfather app to determine the amount of viable cells needed to get our low alcohol beer started, and then added that amount of dry malt extract into a flask with some water. After boiling for about 8 minutes, our wort was sanitized and ready to go. Then it's time to chill down the wort. There are a lot of ways to do this, but to avoid temperature shock and potentially the glass breaking, I like to start with warmer water and then slowly cool it down until we're at our target yeast pitch temperature of around 70 degrees. At that temperature, it's time to remove the foil cover and drop in the magnetic stir bar before placing it on the magnetic stir plate. Stir plate isn't critical for making a yeast starter, but I really like using mine, kind of feels like a science project. With the stir plate going, I'll pour off the old beer from the collected yeast slurry I got from a Pilsner a couple months ago, and then add it into the stirring mixture. With that all together and going, I'll set it aside in a warmish place for a couple days, and then it's time to start our brew day. The brew day starts, as always, by gathering our carbon-filtered water. We're going to bump our mash temperature up to around 176 degrees. But don't panic, that's intentionally high since we're trying to limit the amount of fermentable sugars gathered from our mash. Next added are our water additions, which are especially important considering we don't have much malt to hide behind. Speaking of that malt, today we're using just under a pound of Pilsner malt with a sprinkling of melanoidin and Munich Light. So similar to a basic Pilsner recipe, but just with not much malt. After grinding up our tiny bit of malt, it's time to add it to the mash. Since we're trying to encourage less conversion anyways, I thought I would go ahead and do a 30-minute mash before pulling out our grains and starting our 30-minute boil. I wanted the hops to really pop out in this non-alcoholic batch, so I added a 30-minute and a 5-minute addition of Saaz directly to the boil, skipping my normal hop basket approach. After our 30-minute boil, it's time to cool and transfer the wort to a sanitized fermenter. It's important to be really thorough with your sanitizing practices, as low alcohol means less protection against infection in the final product. During the transfer, we'll take a gravity reading to make sure we didn't accidentally make a real beer. With everything transferred over, it's time to pitch our yeast starter. Unfortunately, I didn't write down what exact strain this yeast was cultured from, so we'll call it our house lager strain. With the yeast added, it's time to give your fermenter a shake and then let it work. I like to ferment mine at about 58 degrees for 7 days, so turn the heat up if it's as cold outside as it is here. After fermentation has slowed down and our final gravity has stabilized at just a few points below where it started, it's time to crash the beer down, transfer it over to the keg, and carbonate it at 15 psi for about a week. And at this point, your non-alcoholic Pilsner is done. So take it to work, or to the park, give it to a kid, or do whatever else you do with your other non-alcoholic liquids. So a couple things that I want out of a non-alcoholic beer. I want it to kind of taste like a beer, not a hop water and not a seltzer. So a little bit of malt taste, a little bit of good flavor. I don't want it to be sweet. I'm not really looking for a high starting and a high finishing gravity. And I want it to be relatively low calorie so I can feel okay about drinking it throughout the week. Something fizzy and interesting to drink if you're maybe doing dry January or if you're just taking a break for whatever reason. This one almost tastes like a hop water with a little bit of malty, a little bit of that graham cracker that I like out of my Pilsners. The head retention is, well, it would be good for a carbonated water. But it's a good, decently low calorie, cost effective homebrew to drink wherever you want to drink it. Cheers.